I should have refused the request, but grief makes people ask for strange things, and we're trained to say yes. My name is Director Marcus Hale, and I have worked as a funeral director at Riverside Memorial Services in Portland, Oregon for 18 years. In that time, I've seen families handle loss in countless ways, some with grace, others with anger, many with silence. But I had never seen a family insist on dividing cremated remains into 5 separate urns until the Keller family walked into my office that cold March afternoon. Robert Keller had died at 73. Heart failure. Quick, relatively peaceful. His 5 children sat across from me, their faces tight with something I couldn't quite read. Not grief exactly, something harder. "We want Dad's ashes split 5 ways," the oldest son, Thomas, said. "Equal portions, 5 identical urns." I explained the practicalities. Most families choose one primary urn, perhaps a few keepsake pendants. Dividing cremains equally isn't common, but it's not forbidden. They insisted. Each sibling wanted their share. Each wanted to take their father home separately. I prepared the urns myself. 5 simple brass containers, identical in every way. I divided the ashes with the kind of precision I usually reserve for difficult embalming work. 2 pounds, 3 ounces in each urn. The math had to be exact. They'd asked for exact. The funeral was small, quiet. The siblings barely spoke to each other during the service. When they left, each carried their portion in a black velvet bag. Thomas was the last to leave. He paused at the door. "We should have buried him whole," he said. I didn't understand what he meant until August. Thomas called first. His brother David had died in a car accident. Single vehicle collision, no explanation. 2 weeks later, their sister Monica had a stroke. She was 46. The doctors called it a statistical anomaly. By October, I'd handled services for 2 more Keller siblings. James fell down his basement stairs. Christine had an aneurysm while gardening. 4 funerals in 8 months. 4 siblings gone. The youngest, Rebecca, came to see me in November. She looked like she'd aged a decade. Her hands shook when she placed the brass urn on my desk. Robert's urn, her portion. "I can't keep it anymore," she said. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't touch the urn. She'd set it down and immediately pulled her hand back, as if it had burned her. "I want you to scatter them, somewhere no one will find, somewhere with no marker, no record. Can you do that?" I told her I could. He left without another word. Didn't sign any paperwork. Didn't ask for documentation. Just walked out of my office, and I never saw her again. I should have scattered the ashes that day. Instead, I put the urn in our storage room, meaning to handle it over the weekend. 3 days later, Rebecca Keller died in her sleep. The coroner found no cause, no drugs, no trauma, no underlying condition. Her heart simply stopped. I scattered Robert's ashes the next morning in our memorial garden's unmarked section, a small plot we reserve for unclaimed or anonymous remains. No ceremony, no witnesses. I poured the gray dust into the soil near a young oak tree and covered it with mulch. That was 4 years ago. The oak tree never grew another inch. In fact, nothing grows in that spot. Not grass, not weeds, not even moss. The mulch I placed there turned gray within a month, the same color as cremated bone. I've tried replanting 3 times. The groundskeeper has tried twice more. Seeds won't take root. Sod dies within a week. Even the soil itself seems different now, dry and fine, like ash mixed with dirt. I check that plot more often than I should. Sometimes early morning before the gates open, sometimes late evening after the families have gone. I tell myself I'm just monitoring the landscaping issue, documenting the problem for our cemetery records. But that's not why I check. I check because sometimes, when the wind is still and the garden is empty, I can see footprints in the gray soil. 5 sets of them, different sizes, different treads. They circle the oak tree in a pattern that makes no sense, overlapping, crossing, returning to the same positions again and again. The groundskeeper says it's animals, raccoons, maybe foxes, but the prints are too deliberate, too human. I've started keeping the other urns I scatter far away from that plot. Different section entirely. I've even suggested to the board that we close that part of the garden, claim soil contamination or drainage issues. They keep postponing the decision. Last week, I found something new near the oak tree. 5 small stones, arranged in a circle around the base of the trunk. Smooth river stones, the kind we sell in our gift shop for memorial cairns. I know they weren't there the day before because I check that plot every single morning now. I removed the stones, threw them in the dumpster behind the maintenance shed. They were back the next day. Same arrangement, same circle. I've stopped trying to remove them. Sometimes, late at night when I'm finishing paperwork, I think about Thomas Keller's last words to me. We should have buried him whole. I think about 5 urns, 5 siblings, 5 graves now in 5 different cemeteries across Portland. I think about division and separation and how some things aren't meant to be split apart. Mostly, I think about that plot of gray soil where nothing will grow and those 5 sets of footprints that appear in patterns I don't want to understand, circling that stunted oak tree like they're looking for something they lost, or like they're trying to come back together. I don't scatter ashes in the memorial garden anymore. There are things in our basement vault that no one talks about, and Urn 47B was the worst of them. My name is Charlotte Webb, and I have worked as a mortician at Pinehurst Memorial Chapel in Boise, Idaho for 22 years. We handle cremations for families who can't afford elaborate services, and sometimes we end up storing the unclaimed, the ashes that no one comes back for, the forgotten. Our basement vault holds 63 urns, numbered chronologically from the year 2001. Each one represents someone who died alone, with no family or next of kin willing to claim them. We keep them for 7 years, as required by state law, before we're allowed to scatter them in our memorial garden. It's depressing work, cataloging the forgotten dead, but someone has to do it. Urn 47B arrived in November of 1987, before the numbering system changed. A woman named Eleanor Voss died alone in a rental apartment. Landlord found her 3 weeks later. No service, no mourners, no flowers. She was cremated at county expense, and her ashes sent to us because we were the cheapest option. The urn itself was plain ceramic, off-white, with a small brass plate. Eleanor Voss, 1923 to 1987. It went on shelf C, position 12, and should have stayed there until 1994. It didn't. I first noticed the problem in 2008. I was doing our annual inventory, checking each urn against our ledger, when I found 47B on shelf F, position 3. Wrong shelf, wrong position. I assumed someone had moved it during cleaning and put it back incorrectly. I returned it to shelf C, position 12, and made a note in the log. 3 months later, it was on shelf A, position 7. I checked the security logs. No one had entered the vault. The door has a keypad lock, and only 3 of us know the code: myself, the director, and our senior assistant. None of us had been down there. I moved it back again. This time, I took a photograph of shelf C, position 12, with the urn in place. Time-stamped, dated. I wanted proof of where it belonged. 2 months later, shelf D, position 15. I started checking weekly. Sometimes 47B would stay in place for months. Other times, I'd find it on a different shelf within days. Always a different position. Always the vault door still locked, security logs empty. Director Hastings told me I was imagining things. Said maybe I was moving it myself and forgetting, stress and long hours playing tricks. He suggested I take some time off. I didn't make time off. Instead, I installed a small motion-activated camera in the vault, angled at shelf C. I didn't tell anyone. I just wanted to know. The first week of footage showed nothing, just darkness and stillness. The second week, the same. I was starting to think Hastings was right, that I was losing my grip. Then I checked the footage from a Tuesday night in March. At 11:42 p.m., the camera caught movement. Not someone entering. No one entered. The urn itself moved. Just slightly at first, a small rotation on its base. Then it slid, slowly, deliberately, to the edge of the shelf. It paused there for almost a minute, perfectly balanced on the rim. Then it dropped. I waited for the sound of ceramic shattering, but the footage showed the urn landing gently on the concrete floor, upright, undamaged. It sat there for 3 seconds. Then it began to rock, back and forth, slow, rhythmic movements, like someone was gently pushing it with their finger. Except there was no one there. It rocked for 3 hours and 17 minutes. I watched every second of that footage. 3 hours of an urn moving on its own in an empty basement. This gentle, persistent motion that shouldn't exist. At 2:59 a.m., it stopped, just became still again, sitting upright on the concrete floor where it had fallen. I showed the footage to Hastings. He watched it twice, his face getting paler each time. He didn't suggest I take time off after that. We decided to bury 47B in our memorial garden. Didn't matter that 7 years hadn't passed. We weren't waiting anymore. Eleanor Voss had been unclaimed for over 3 decades. It was time I dug the hole myself in the oldest section of the garden near the maintenance shed. No ceremony, no marker, just me and a shovel and an urn that wouldn't stay where I put it. The burial was simple. I placed 47B in the ground, covered it with 2 feet of soil, tamped it down, and said a quiet prayer I'm not sure I believed. Eleanor Voss was finally at rest. I thought that was the end. But 3 nights later, I checked the camera footage one last time before removing the equipment. I wanted to see the vault empty, peaceful, normal. The camera caught something at 3 a.m. that Thursday. Shelf C, position 12, where 47B used to sit, was occupied again. The urn was back. Same ceramic surface, same brass plate, same everything. Sitting exactly where it had been before I buried it. I went to the garden the next morning. The soil was undisturbed, no sign of digging. I took a spade and excavated the spot where I'd buried the urn. It was still there. 47B, ceramic and brass, exactly as I'd left it. I went back to the vault, opened shelf C, position 12. The urn was still there too. I've never told anyone about this. Hastings retired last year, and I'm the senior mortician now. I stopped checking the vault except when absolutely necessary. I stopped watching the camera footage. I removed the equipment and destroyed the recordings. Both urns are still where I left them, one buried in the garden, one on shelf C, position 12. I don't know which one is real. I don't know if either of them is real anymore. But sometimes, late at night when I'm closing up, I can hear something from the basement. A gentle sound, rhythmic and patient. The sound of ceramic rocking against concrete. I don't go down there after dark anymore. Some requests should be refused immediately, but I've learned that grief doesn't follow logic. My name is Leonard Pike, and I have worked as a crematory technician at Westview Cremation Services in Tacoma, Washington, for 16 years. My job is simple: operate the retort, process remains with respect and precision, return ashes to families in sealed containers. I follow protocol. I maintain equipment. I don't ask questions about what families do with cremains once they leave our facility. I should have asked questions about Margaret Chen. She came in on a Tuesday morning in late September, a small woman in her 70s, with careful movements and red-rimmed eyes. Her husband had died 3 days earlier. Lung cancer. She'd been his sole caretaker for 18 months. The paperwork was in order. Standard cremation, simple urn, no service. Everything was routine until she made her request. I need you to mix his ashes with something, she said. This wasn't unusual. Families sometimes asked us to combine cremains, spouses who wanted to be mixed together, parents and children. We had protocols for it. I asked her what she wanted combined. My dog, she said. His childhood dog. I had her cremated 32 years ago, and I've kept her ashes all this time. Richard loved that dog more than anything. They should be together. She pulled a small wooden box from her purse, old pine, darkened with age. Inside was a sealed plastic bag containing perhaps 2 cups of gray-white ash. The bag was labeled in faded ink, Daisy, 1989. I explained that mixing cremains was possible, but unusual for a pet that had been dead for 3 decades. She insisted she wanted them combined in a single urn before she took her husband home. She'd brought Daisy's ashes specifically for this purpose. I should have said no, should have explained that our facility didn't handle pet cremains mixing, should have suggested she do it herself at home. But she looked so tired, so desperate for this one thing to go right. I agreed. The process was simple. After her husband's cremation was complete and the ashes properly processed, I carefully combined them in our mixing vessel, a clean stainless steel bowl we use for this purpose. I added Daisy's remains, stirred them together with a wooden paddle, and transferred everything to the urn Margaret had selected. A simple brass container with an engraved nameplate, Richard Chen, beloved husband. She took the urn home that afternoon. She seemed calmer, more settled, said it felt right to have them together again after all these years. I didn't hear from her again until her daughter called 2 weeks later. My mother's in the hospital, she said. Her voice was tight, frightened. Organ failure. The doctors don't know why. She was fine, healthy, and now her kidneys are shutting down and they can't figure out what's causing it. I offered condolences, asked if there was anything I could do. There was a long pause. She told me something before they sedated her, the daughter said. She said she's been hearing sounds from the urn at night, scratching sounds, like something trying to get out. I felt something cold move through my chest. She said it started the first night she brought Dad home, scratching on the brass from the inside. She thought she was imagining it, grief playing tricks, but it got louder, more insistent. She'd wake up and hear it, this persistent scratching, and the urn would be warm to the touch even though the room was cold. The daughter's voice cracked. She said she opened the urn the 3 nights ago, just lifted the lid to prove to herself nothing was there, and something gray puffed out, like a small cloud of dust, and she breathed it in before she could stop herself. I drove to the hospital that evening. Margaret Chen was in ICU, unconscious, connected to machines that were doing the work her organs no longer could. Her daughter met me in the hallway. The doctors say it's like her body is shutting down from the inside, she said. Kidney failure, liver failure. Her lungs are starting to deteriorate. They've never seen anything like it. There's no infection, no toxin they can identify. She's just dying and they don't know why. I asked about the urn, where it was now. At her house, on the mantel. I can't go near it. The daughter wrapped her arms around herself. I visited yesterday to get some of Mom's things. The whole house smells wrong, like ash and something else, something rotten, and I swear I heard scratching from the living room, but when I looked, nothing was moving. Margaret Chen died 4 days later, multiple organ failure. The autopsy showed extensive tissue damage, consistent with aggressive poisoning, but toxicology came back clean. Nothing in her system, nothing to explain it. I attended her funeral, small service, cremation. Her daughter chose a simple urn, nothing like the brass container her father rested in. At the reception afterward, she pulled me aside. I threw Dad's urn away, she said quietly, took it to the dump in a sealed trash bag. I couldn't keep it in the house anymore. The scratching got worse after Mom died, louder, and the urn was always warm no matter where I put it. Even in the garage in 40-degree weather, the brass was warm like something alive was inside it. She looked at me with exhausted eyes. What did you put in there? I had no answer. Just ashes. 2 sets of remains. One human, one animal. Nothing living, nothing that could scratch or breathe or create warmth. Nothing that should have killed anyone. That was 7 months ago. I still work at Westview. I still operate the retort, process remains, return ashes to families. But I don't offer to mix cremains anymore. When families ask, I suggest they handle it themselves at home, in their own time. I've started checking the mixing vessel more carefully after each use. Sometimes, in the early morning when the facility is empty and I'm preparing for the day's work, I run my hand along the inside of the stainless steel bowl. The metal is always slightly warm, and sometimes, if I listen very carefully in the silence, I can hear something faint beneath the hum of our equipment. It sounds like scratching. Every cemetery has sections that feel wrong, and Plot 19J has always been one of ours. My name is Carlos Ruiz, and I have worked as a groundskeeper at Evergreen Memorial Park in Santa Fe, New Mexico for 11 years. I maintain the lawns, trim the hedges, dig graves when needed, and keep the columbarium niches clean. It's quiet work, peaceful most days. The dead don't complain, and the families appreciate someone who cares for their loved ones' resting places. Plot 19J is in the oldest section of our columbarium wall, near the back where the brick shows its age, and the metal niche doors have started to oxidize. Each niche holds 1 or 2 urns sealed behind a bronze door with an engraved nameplate. The section dates back to 1963. Most of the names are faded now. The Mercer family requested adjacent niches in July. Husband and wife, both deceased within 6 months of each other. Helen first, then Thomas. The family wanted them side by side in death, as they'd been in life. Sweet sentiment, we see it all the time. I installed both urns myself, Helen in niche 19J-A, Thomas in 19J-B, right next to each other. Simple brass urns, identical except for the nameplates. I sealed both doors, checked the plaques were level, and marked the work order complete. 3 days later, the daughter called the office. Something's wrong with the urns, she said. I met her at the columbarium that afternoon. She stood in front of her parents' niches, arms wrapped tight around herself despite the summer heat. Look at them, she said. I looked. Both urns were visible through the small glass windows in the bronze doors, and both showed identical hairline cracks running from the base to the lid in thin, precise lines. The cracks mirrored each other exactly, same pattern, same position, like someone had taken the urns out, cracked them in identical ways, and returned them to the niches, except no one had opened those niches. I'd sealed them myself with industrial adhesive. The doors hadn't been touched. How did this happen? She asked. I had no answer. Brass doesn't crack like that. urns don't develop spontaneous fractures, and certainly not identical ones in separate sealed niches. I promised to look into it. That night, she called me directly. Her voice was shaking. My phone rang, she said. My father's phone number, the one we disconnected after he died. It showed up on my caller ID. I asked if she'd answered. Yes. Long pause. I heard breathing, just breathing, for maybe 10 seconds. Then someone whispered my name, Sarah, just once. It sounded like my father, but wrong somehow, distant and hollow. I suggested it was a spoofed number, a scam call, something technical she could report. Even as I said it, I didn't believe it. It called again, 20 minutes later, she said. Same number, same breathing. This time it whispered Mom's name, Helen. The calls continued for 3 days. Always from Thomas Mercer's disconnected number. Always the same pattern, breathing, then a name whispered in that hollow voice. Sometimes Sarah's name, sometimes Helen's. Once, Sarah's young son picked up. He told his mother a man had asked him to tell them to move us. On the 4th day, I went back to plot 19J. The cracks in both urns had widened. What had been hairline fractures were now visible splits, spreading like spider webs across the brass surfaces. The patterns still mirrored each other perfectly. I called the director. She came out personally, examined the niches, took photographs. We agreed to move the urns to different sections of the columbarium. It wasn't standard practice, but the situation wasn't standard either. I moved Helen first, broke the seal on niche 19J-A, carefully removed her urn, and relocated it to section 12, 3 walls away from Thomas. The urn felt warm in my hands, warmer than the summer air could account for. The cracks seemed deeper when I held it, more pronounced. I moved Thomas the next morning, placed his urn in section 8, opposite side of the columbarium from Helen, as far apart as I could manage while keeping both in the same facility. Sarah called me that afternoon. The calls stopped, she said. My phone hasn't rung since yesterday evening. I felt relieved. Whatever had been happening, the separation had ended it. Problem solved through simple physical distance. That relief lasted 2 weeks. Sarah called again in early August. She was crying. They're back together, she said. I didn't understand. I asked her to explain. The calls started again last night. Same number, same breathing, same whispers. I went to the columbarium this morning. I had to see them. I already knew what she was going to say. They're side by side again. Niches 19J-A and B, both of them, exactly where you put them originally. I drove out immediately. Sarah was right. Helen's urn sat in 19J-A, Thomas's in 19J-B. The niches I'd moved them from, the niches I'd personally relocated them away from. I checked section 12. The niche where I'd moved Helen was empty, doors still sealed. Section 8, same thing. Thomas's new location was sealed and empty. Both urns were back in plot 19J. The adhesive seals were intact. No signs of tampering. No signs anyone had opened anything. I moved them again, different sections, different walls. I used stronger adhesive. I took photographs documenting the new locations. I checked the security cameras. Nothing. No one had accessed the columbarium after hours. 3 days later, they were back in Plot 19J. I've moved them 7 times now. Helen and Thomas always return to niches. 19J-A and B, always sealed, always together. The cracks have spread to cover both urns entirely now, intricate patterns of fractures that mirror each other in impossible detail. Sarah's phone still rings sometimes, the disconnected number, the breathing, the whispers, but the message has changed. Now the voice just says one word, over and over, together. I don't move the urns anymore. The director has filed reports, contacted the family, suggested everything from manufacturing defects to environmental factors. No one mentions the obvious. I trim the hedges near Plot 19J every Tuesday. I keep the brass doors polished. I maintain the area like any other section of the columbarium. And I leave Helen and Thomas Mercer exactly where they keep returning to, side by side in Plot 19J, where they clearly want to stay. There are some requests that feel wrong from the beginning, but we fulfill them anyway because grief demands accommodations. My name is Director Angela Kim, and I have worked as a funeral director at Crestview Memorial Services in Minneapolis, Minnesota for 14 years. We pride ourselves on personalized services, on helping families memorialize their loved ones in meaningful ways. Keepsake jewelry, memorial artwork, custom urns. We facilitate whatever brings comfort. Catherine Brennan wanted something different. Her son, Michael, was 24 when he died. Motorcycle accident. Instant, the police said, though that word never brings the comfort people think it will. Catherine took the loss hard. She'd been a single mother. Michael was her only child. She came to my office 2 days after his cremation, moving like someone underwater. I'd handled hundreds of grieving parents. I recognized the particular emptiness in her eyes, the way she couldn't quite focus on anything for more than a few seconds. I want to share him, she said. She explained her idea. She had a large extended family, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, Michael's friends, 7 people in particular who'd been important in his life. She wanted small glass vials made, delicate pieces that could be worn as pendants. Each vial would contain a portion of Michael's ashes. Each person would carry a piece of him. I'd done keepsake jewelry before. Small amounts of cremains and lockets or pendants aren't unusual, but 7 separate vials felt different somehow. Something about dividing him that way made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't articulate. I suggested alternatives. A memorial gathering where she could give out photos, perhaps items from Michael's possessions. She shook her head. They need to carry him with them, she said. He was so alive. He shouldn't just sit in an urn on my mantle. He should be with the people who loved him. I agreed, ordered the vials from our supplier, hand-blown glass, small cork stoppers, delicate silver chains. They arrived a week later, beautiful pieces, really. Each one held perhaps a teaspoon of ash. I filled them myself, carefully measuring equal portions from Michael's urn. 7 vials, 7 chains, 7 small pieces of a young man who should have lived decades longer. Catherine distributed them at a memorial gathering she hosted. I wasn't there, but she called me afterward to thank me, said everyone was touched by the gesture, that they all promised to wear them always. The first death happened 6 weeks later. Catherine's brother, James. Car accident on the interstate. Crossed the center line at highway speed, hit a semi head on. The police report mentioned no brake marks, no attempt to correct, just straight across into oncoming traffic. I handled his funeral. Catherine sat in the front row, hollow eyed, clutching a small glass vial on a chain around her neck. 3 months later, Michael's best friend drowned in a lake during a family trip. Strong swimmer, calm water, no explanation. His body was found floating face down 50 feet from shore. Then Catherine's cousin, heart attack at 39, no history of heart disease. Then Michael's girlfriend, aneurysm, dead before the ambulance arrived. 4 deaths in 7 months, all people who'd received vials of Michael's ashes. I started paying attention to the obituaries, checking names against the list Catherine had given me when ordering the vials. When the 5th death occurred, Michael's uncle fell from a ladder doing routine home maintenance. I called Catherine. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. "You've noticed," she said. Her voice was flat, empty of inflection. I asked about the remaining vial holders. 2 left. Her sister and one of Michael's college friends. "They brought them back," she said, "last week. They didn't say anything, just handed me the vials and left. They looked terrified." I asked what she'd done with the returned vials. Long pause. I could hear her breathing, slow and measured, like she was fighting for control. "I want to bring them to you," she said. "All of them, the 7 vials, and what's left of Michael's ashes, in the main urn. I want you to dispose of them properly, scatter them somewhere. I don't care where." She arrived at my office the next afternoon, placed a small wooden box on my desk. Inside, the 7 glass vials, still on their silver chains. 5 of them dark with old blood around the cork stoppers. I didn't ask why. She also brought Michael's urn, the one that had held the rest of his ashes after I'd filled the keepsake vials. "I need to watch," she said. We drove to the Minnehaha Creek, a small waterway that feeds into the Mississippi. Quiet spot, tree-lined, peaceful. I brought everything, the 7 vials, the urn, all of what remained of Michael Brennan. Catherine stood at the water's edge while I poured. First the vials, opening each one carefully and letting the ash drift into the current. Then the urn, a larger quantity that created a gray cloud in the clear water before dispersing downstream. Neither of us spoke. When it was done, I handed Catherine the empty containers. She held them for a moment, then threw them into the creek as well. The glass vials sank quickly. The brass urn floated for several seconds before the current pulled it under. That was 9 months ago. Catherine's sister and Michael's friend are still alive. No accidents, no sudden illnesses, no unexplained deaths. The obituaries have been quiet. But Catherine calls me sometimes, late at night. Never says much. Just needs to hear someone else breathing on the line, I think. Last week she told me something I wish I could forget. "I dream about him," she said. Michael, he's standing in water, looking up at me, and he's got all these people around him in the water, too. James and Lisa and Thomas and everyone who died. They're all just standing there, looking up at the surface like they're waiting for something. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear traffic in her background, the distant sound of a television. In the dream, he's asking me why I threw him away, she said, why I didn't keep him, and I try to explain, but the water keeps getting higher, and I can't reach him anymore. I told her it was just grief manifesting, the mind processing trauma. She didn't respond. Sometimes I drive past Minnehaha Creek on my way home. I never stop. I never look too closely at the water. But I think about 7 glass vials sinking into the current and 5 people who died carrying pieces of someone who maybe didn't want to be divided. I don't offer keepsake jewelry anymore. I've transported thousands of urns to families over the years, but I only remember one that I wish I'd refused to deliver. My name is Daniel Moss, and I have worked as a transport driver for Horizon Funeral Services in Salem, Oregon for 19 years. My job is straightforward: deliver urns to families who've chosen home memorialization, pick up bodies from hospitals and nursing homes, transport caskets to burial sites. I drive careful routes, maintain respectful silence, and treat every delivery like it matters. Because it does. Robert Callahan's urn was unremarkable. Standard brushed steel, medium size, simple engraving. His widow, Patricia, had requested home delivery rather than pickup. She'd recently had hip surgery and couldn't drive. I brought the urn to her house on a Wednesday afternoon in October, a modest ranch home with yellowing grass and peeling paint. Patricia answered the door leaning on a walker. She was perhaps 60, thin and pale, with careful movements that suggested pain. She thanked me, signed the paperwork, and asked me to place the urn on the fireplace mantel. The living room was dated, floral wallpaper, worn carpet, furniture from decades past. Family photos covered every surface. Most featured Robert and Patricia at various ages, always together, wedding photos, vacation snapshots, portraits spanning 40 years of marriage. I placed the urn on the mantel as requested, centered it carefully between 2 candlesticks, and offered my condolences. Patricia stood in the doorway, staring at the urn with an expression I couldn't read. Not grief exactly, something more complicated. 6 years, she said quietly. We were supposed to have more time. I left her there, standing alone with her husband's ashes on the mantel. That was supposed to be the end of my involvement. Delivery complete, paperwork filed, route continued. But Patricia called the funeral home 6 months later, asking specifically for me. I need you to take Robert's ashes to the coast, she said, to scatter them. It's what he wanted. This wasn't unusual. Many families keep cremains for months or years before final disposition, waiting for the right time or place. I scheduled the service for the following Saturday, a scattering ceremony at a beach Robert had loved. Patricia called back Thursday night and canceled. I can't do it, she said. Her voice sounded strange over the phone, tight and scared. Not yet. She rescheduled 3 more times over the next 2 years. Each time, we'd set a date, prepare for the ceremony, and she'd cancel within days. Always the same reason: she wasn't ready. The fourth attempt, she didn't cancel. I arrived at her house early Saturday morning to find another car in the driveway. A woman answered the door, younger, perhaps 40. She introduced herself as Linda, Patricia's sister. "She's ready this time," Linda said, but her face suggested otherwise. Patricia emerged from the house moving slowly, her walker replaced by a cane. She looked older than I remembered, more worn. Linda carried Robert's urn, holding it away from her body like it might burn her. We drove to the coast in my van. Patricia quite in the passenger seat, Linda in the back with the urn. No one spoke for the entire hour-long drive. The beach was empty that morning, gray sky meeting gray water in an indistinct line. I helped Patricia navigate the sand to the water's edge, while Linda followed with the urn. When we reached the wet sand, Patricia took the urn herself. She held it for a long moment, her hands trembling. Then she opened it and began to scatter the ashes into the wind. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I have to." The ashes caught the ocean breeze and dispersed quickly, gray dust disappearing into the surf and sand. Patricia poured until the urn was empty, then stood there holding the container, her shoulders shaking. Linda drove Patricia home. I followed in my van, the empty urn wrapped in a towel on the passenger seat. That night, Patricia Callahan died in her sleep. I learned about it when Linda called me Monday morning. She sounded exhausted, her words coming in short bursts, like she couldn't quite catch her breath. "The doctors say it was natural causes," she said. "Heart failure, no warning, no signs. She just went to sleep and didn't wake up." I offered condolences. There was a long pause. "There's something else," Linda said. "Something Patricia told me the night before the scattering. I need to tell someone, and I don't know who else would understand." I waited. She said she'd been hearing Robert's voice for the past week, coming from the urn, calling her name at night. She'd wake up and hear him saying, "Patricia," over and over, quiet but persistent. Linda's voice dropped lower. She said it wasn't asking her to scatter his ashes. It was telling her not to. The voice was saying, "Stay." Just that one word, "stay." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "She told me she had to do it anyway," Linda continued, "that Robert's new partner had been pressuring her for months to move on, to clear out the house, to let go. The partner wanted to help her find a new place, a fresh start. Patricia felt guilty keeping Robert on the mantle like a shrine." Another long pause. I could hear traffic in Linda's background, someone talking in another room. But she said the voice got louder that last week, more urgent, and the urn was always warm when she touched it, even in the cold house with the heat turned down. She said she knew what would happen if she scattered the ashes, but she did it anyway because she thought she was losing her mind. I handled Patricia's funeral 3 days later. Cremation, per her wishes. Her ashes were scattered at the same beach where we'd released Robert's remains, in a private ceremony I didn't attend. Linda called me one more time after that, maybe a month later. "I was going through Patricia's things," she said, "found her journal, She'd been writing in it every night for the past year. She read me the last entry, dated the day before the scattering. Robert asked me to stay again tonight. I can hear him so clearly now, like he's standing beside me. The urn is hot to the touch. I know what this means. I know what will happen, but I can't keep living like this, with his voice in my head every night, begging me not to let him go. Tomorrow I scatter his ashes. Tomorrow I finally rest. Linda was quiet for a moment after reading. Do you think she knew? She asked. Really knew? I had no answer then. I have no answer now. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving empty roads between deliveries, I think about Patricia Callahan standing on that beach, pouring her husband's ashes into the wind while apologizing quietly to something only she could hear. I think about the word stay, and I wonder how many other urns I've delivered sit on mantels, slowly warming, quietly calling names in the darkness of empty houses. I don't ask families how long they plan to keep cremains anymore. Some urns choose their own resting places, and we're just here to witness the choosing. My name is Director Priya Patel, and I have worked as cemetery director at Oakmont Memorial Gardens in Columbus, Ohio, for 23 years. I oversee burial operations, maintain our grounds, coordinate with families, and ensure that the deceased remain exactly where they're laid to rest. That last part used to be simple. It used to be certain. Then the Morrison family brought me Evelyn. Evelyn Morrison died at 87 in her sleep, surrounded by the kind of quiet dignity that long lives sometimes afford. Natural causes, no trauma, no drama. Her family chose cremation and a simple brass urn with minimal engraving. The service was small. 6 family members attended, 3 children, 3 grandchildren. They seemed close, speaking in that shorthand way families develop over decades. The oldest daughter, Margaret, approached me after the service. Mother wanted to be kept by family, she said, not buried. She wanted to stay with us, move between our homes. Is that allowed? It wasn't common, but it wasn't forbidden. Many families keep cremains at home for years. I explained the paperwork requirements, the liability releases, the understanding that the urn would remain family property and responsibility. Margaret signed everything, took the urn home that afternoon to her house in Upper Arlington. She called me 3 weeks later. The urn moved, she said. I asked her to clarify. Objects don't move on their own. Perhaps someone in the household had relocated it. No one touched it, Margaret insisted. I placed it on the bookshelf in my living room, and when I came home from work, it was on the kitchen counter. My husband thought I'd moved it. I thought he had, but neither of us touched it. I suggested misremembering, stress, the small confusions that grief can cause. She didn't sound convinced. 2 weeks later, Margaret's sister Beth called me. The urn is at my house now, she said. Margaret dropped it off yesterday. But here's the strange part. I found it in my bedroom this morning, on my dresser. I know for a fact I left it downstairs on the console table when Margaret gave it to me. I began to pay attention. Over the next 4 months, Evelyn Morrison's urn traveled between all 6 family members' homes. each time the same pattern emerged. Someone would receive the urn, place it in a specific location, and within days find it elsewhere in the house, living rooms to bedrooms, kitchen counters to bathroom shelves, entryway tables to basement storage rooms. No one ever saw it move. No one could explain the relocations. The urn simply appeared in new places, like it was exploring the houses on its own. The dreams started in June. All 6 family members reported identical experiences, waking in the middle of the night to find Evelyn standing in their bedroom doorway, not threatening, not moving, just standing there in the darkness, watching them sleep. Margaret described it first. She's wearing her blue dress, the one we buried her in before the cremation. She doesn't say anything, she just stands there, and I can see her so clearly even though the room is dark. Then I blink, and she's gone. Beth had the same dream 3 nights in a row. Then the youngest son, David, then the grandchildren, all describing identical details: the blue dress, the doorway, the silent watching. They stopped passing the urn between houses after that. We can't keep doing this, Margaret told me over the phone. Whatever is happening, it needs to stop. We want to bury the urn at Oakmont, in your oldest section, somewhere permanent. I prepared a plot in Section A, our original cemetery grounds, dating back to 1893. Mature oak trees, weathered headstones, the quiet dignity of age. Plot A-67, near the northern wall. The burial was simple. All 6 family members attended. We lowered the urn into the ground, sealed the vault, covered everything with soil and sod. Margaret ordered a small flat marker, Evelyn Morrison, 1929 to 2017, beloved mother and grandmother. The marker was installed 2 weeks later. I checked on the plot regularly after that, part of my normal rounds. Everything appeared undisturbed. The grass grew in nicely. The marker settled level with the ground, a proper, peaceful resting place. Then Margaret called again in September. The dreams are back, she said. All of us. Same dream. Evelyn in the doorway. But now she's pointing at something we can't see. I assured her the urn was secure, properly buried, undisturbed. She didn't sound reassured. I visited the plot that evening after the gates closed, just to confirm. The marker was there, the grass looked normal, everything exactly as it should be, except the ground felt warm when I knelt to examine the marker. Not hot, just warmer than it should be on a cool September evening. I pressed my palm flat against the grass. Definite warmth emanating from the soil beneath. I returned the next morning with our groundskeeper. We used a probe to check the vault depth. Everything measured correctly. We examined the surrounding soil for any sign of disturbance. Nothing unusual. The warmth I'd felt the previous evening was gone, but the marker had shifted just slightly, maybe an inch to the left of its original position. The groundskeeper insisted it hadn't moved, that markers don't shift once they're properly installed and settled. I took photographs anyway, documented the position. 3 days later, the marker had moved again. 2 inches this time, clearly visible against the surrounding grass pattern. Still level, still flush with the ground, just in a different position. I contacted the monument company. They sent someone to reinstall it. using additional adhesive, securing it more firmly. The technician assured me it wouldn't move again. It moved that night. I have photographs now documenting 16 different positions over 3 months. The marker never shifts while anyone is watching, but it moves, sometimes inches, sometimes feet, always staying within the general area of plot A 67, but never in quite the same spot. The vault underneath hasn't moved. We've confirmed this with ground penetrating radar. The urn is exactly where we buried it, 5 feet down, properly sealed, just the marker moves. Last month, something new appeared. The grass above the plot started dying in a specific pattern, a rough hand shape, as if someone underground was reaching upward. The shape points north, toward the cemetery's oldest mausoleum. I've stopped trying to fix the marker's position. The family has stopped calling about the dreams, though Margaret told me they continue weekly. Evelyn in the doorway, pointing. Last week, I found the marker moved again, but this time, something was different. There were cracks in the granite, not from weather or age, cracks that formed a pattern, spreading from the center outward, like fingers grasping, like something trying to hold on. I keep the plot maintained. I keep the grass trimmed around the dying hand-shaped patch that won't green up no matter what we do. I document the marker's positions in a private log I don't share with anyone. And sometimes, early morning, when I'm the only one in the cemetery, I stand at plot A 67 and feel the warmth in the ground beneath my feet. Evelyn Morrison is buried exactly where she should be, but I don't think she's resting. Most families scatter ashes in places of beauty and meaning, but some places reject what we give them. My name is Rafael Torres, and I have worked as a funeral aide at Serenity Memorial Chapel in Tucson, Arizona for 12 years. I assist with services, prepare viewing rooms, coordinate with families, and sometimes witness the private moments when grief becomes something else entirely. I've learned to recognize when a family's plans feel wrong, even if I can't explain why. The Henderson family's request seemed simple enough. Gerald Henderson had died at 69 after a brief illness. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal. His family wanted to honor his wishes, scatter his ashes in their backyard garden, the place he'd spent every weekend for 30 years cultivating roses and vegetables and the kind of a careful order that some men build to make sense of the world. I wasn't required to attend private scatterings, but Gerald's daughter, Lisa, asked if I would. She seemed uncertain, anxious in a way that went beyond normal grief. I agreed. The Henderson home sat on 2 acres in the foothills, an older ranch with a sprawling yard. The garden was impressive, raised beds of vegetables, trellised roses in full bloom, stone pathways winding between carefully planned sections. You could see decades of work in every detail. 5 family members gathered that warm Saturday morning. Lisa, her 2 brothers, their mother Sharon, and 1 grandson who looked about 12. Sharon held the urn, simple cedar wood, modest and organic as Gerald had requested. We walked to the garden's center, where an old oak tree provided shade over a small seating area. Sharon opened the urn and began to scatter the ashes, moving slowly between the raised beds, speaking quietly to her husband's remains as she released them. You're home now, Gerald, back in your garden where you belong. The ashes settled into the soil, gray-white powder dusting the dark earth and green leaves. Some caught in the roses, others disappeared between the vegetable rows. Within 20 minutes, the urn was empty, and Gerald Henderson was distributed across the garden he'd loved. I left the family to their private grief, drove back to the chapel, and marked the service complete in our records. Lisa called me 6 weeks later. Something's wrong with the garden, she said. I asked what she meant. Everything's dying. All of it. The roses, the vegetables, even the weeds. Nothing will grow anymore. I suggested normal seasonal changes, perhaps neglect after Gerald's death. Gardens require constant maintenance. No, she said firmly. This is different. Everything turned brown within 2 weeks of the scattering, and there's something else. I waited. The whole family is sick. Mom, my brothers, my nephew, me. We all have these respiratory infections that won't go away. The doctors have tried everything: antibiotics, antivirals, steroids. Nothing works. We just keep coughing, struggling to breathe, getting worse. I expressed concern, asked if they'd considered environmental factors, mold perhaps, or air quality issues. The doctors tested for everything, Lisa said. There's nothing wrong with the house according to the inspections, but we keep getting sicker. 3 months later, Sharon called to tell me they were moving, the entire family, abandoning the house Gerald had lived in for 40 years. We can't stay here anymore, she said. Her voice was rough, strained, the respiratory infection Lisa had mentioned. We're all too sick. The doctors say we need a complete change of environment. She paused, and I heard her labored breathing over the phone. I need to tell you something before we leave, something you should know. The family had hired professional cleaners to prepare the house for sale. Deep cleaning, top to bottom. The cleaners had called Sharon in a panic after their first day. They found ash everywhere, Sharon said. Every surface, the kitchen counters, the bathroom sinks, coating the floors and furniture. Gray ash like fine powder. They cleaned it all up, used industrial equipment. The next day it was back. Same amount, same places. They cleaned again. It came back again. The cleaners refused to return after the third attempt. We thought maybe it was dust from the vents or the HVAC system, Sharon continued. Had everything inspected and cleaned professionally, but the ash keeps appearing. Every morning, fresh layers coating everything. Her breathing grew more labored. I heard her cough, a wet, rattling sound that lasted almost a minute. The house has been empty for 2 weeks now, she said finally. We're staying with my sister while we wait for it to sell. But the real estate agent called yesterday. She went to check on the property and had to leave immediately. Said the air was thick with dust, that she couldn't breathe, that every surface was covered in what looked like cremated remains. I didn't know what to say. We're selling it as is, Sharon said. Disclosure and all. I don't care anymore. I just want to be done with that place. The house sold 3 months later to a young couple relocating from California. I only know because Lisa called me one final time. The new owners contacted us, she said. They want to know what we did to the house. After moving in, the couple had discovered the same gray ash coating every surface. They'd cleaned repeatedly. The ash returned every morning. They'd had the HVAC system completely replaced, all the ductwork removed and reinstalled. The ash continued. Within 6 weeks, both developed severe respiratory infections. Their doctors couldn't identify the cause. Standard infections don't present this way, they were told. Don't resist treatment this aggressively. Don't affect lung tissue with this particular kind of damage. They found ash in their lungs, Lisa said quietly. Both of them. The doctors did bronchoscopies, human cremains, in their lung tissue. The pathology reports confirmed it. The house is empty now, unsellable. The couple moved out after 3 months, didn't try to get their money back, just left. Lisa told me the real estate photos show a nice suburban home with a dead garden, but anyone who visits reports the same experience: thick air, difficulty breathing, fine gray powder covering surfaces that were clean hours before. The city condemned the property last month. Environmental hazard. No one can explain the source of the contamination or how to remediate it. I think about Gerald Henderson sometimes, scattered in his beloved garden, released into soil that couldn't hold him. I think about ash that won't settle, that keeps returning, coating surfaces and filling lungs and refusing to rest. I think about Sharon's words during the scattering. You're home now, Gerald. But maybe home didn't want him back. Maybe the garden knew something we didn't. I don't attend private scatterings anymore. When families ask, I politely decline. Temperature is supposed to mean nothing to the dead, but I've learned that some remains carry their own climate. My name is Jude Whitmore, and I have worked as an embalmer at Riverside Funeral Home in Portland, Maine, for 17 years. I prepare bodies for viewing, restore what illness and death have damaged, and maintain the dignity of the deceased through technical precision and respectful care. I work with cold every day: cold storage, cold bodies, the particular chill that death brings to flesh. I thought I understood cold. Then I met Claire Hutchins. She brought her mother to us in February, during one of those bitter Maine winters where the cold settles into your bones and stays. The deceased was Dorothy Hutchins, 73, died of complications from pneumonia. Standard preparation, standard cremation, nothing unusual in the paperwork. Claire requested a decorative urn instead of our standard brass. She'd brought one from home, a beautiful ceramic piece, hand-painted with winter scenes. Birch trees and snow, delicate and artistic. Her mother had been a painter, she explained. This urn felt appropriate. I handled the cremation myself, processed the remains carefully, and transferred them to Claire's urn. When I sealed it, I noticed the ceramic felt cool to the touch, but that seemed normal. The funeral home keeps the preparation room at 58 degrees. Everything feels cold. Claire picked up the urn the next day. She held it for a moment, then looked at me with a strange expression. It's freezing, she said. I explained it had been stored in a cool room. It would warm to room temperature once she got it home. She called me 3 days later. The urn is still cold, she said. Ice cold. I've had it in my living room for 72 hours. Room temperature is 70 degrees, and the ceramic feels like it's been in a freezer. I suggested thermal properties of the ceramic material, how some glazes retain temperature longer than expected. She didn't sound convinced. My hands hurt when I touch it, she said, like touching dry ice. 2 weeks later, Claire came to the funeral home in person. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, moving her hands stiffly. She unwrapped her scarf to show me her palms. They were covered in what looked like severe frostbite, white patches, blackened fingertips, tissue damage that suggested exposure to extreme cold for extended periods. The doctors don't understand it, she said. No exposure to cold, no medical condition that would cause this, but it keeps getting worse. She showed me her hands in detail. The damage was extensive. Second-degree frostbite at minimum, possibly deeper tissue involvement. Her fingertips were turning black. It started the second week I had the urn, she said. I'd wake up with my hands aching, cold burning through my fingers. At first I thought it was poor circulation. Then the tissue started dying. I asked if she'd been handling the urn. Only when I move it to dust, she said. But the coldness is spreading. The table where it sits, the wood is developing frost patterns. In a heated house, in February in Maine, yes, but inside with the heat running constantly. The frost patterns only appear on that one table, radiating out from where the urn sits. She pulled out her phone and showed me photographs. Clear images of delicate ice crystals spreading across dark wood, beautiful and impossible. I need you to take it back, she said. I can't keep it anymore. My hands are dying, and the doctors want to amputate if the tissue damage continues. I explained that we don't typically accept returns of cremated remains, but given the circumstances, we could arrange for burial in our memorial garden. No, Claire said quickly. Not burial. I need it gone, really gone. Not in the ground where it could affect the soil or the water table. I don't know what's wrong with those ashes, but they need to be isolated. We settled on a plan. I would take the urn, store it in our secure vault, and we'd consult with specialists about proper disposal for potentially contaminated cremains. She signed paperwork releasing us from liability and left without touching the urn. I carried it myself, double wrapped in towels. Even through the insulation, I could feel the cold. I placed the urn in our basement vault, our most secure storage area. Climate controlled, locked, limited access. I documented everything: temperature readings, photographs, condition reports. The urn measured 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The surrounding air was 62 degrees. I checked 3 times with different thermometers. 38 degrees, consistent across all measurements. I left it overnight and checked again in the morning, 34 degrees. Dropping. Over the next week, I monitored it daily. The temperature continued falling, 32 degrees, 28, 23. The ceramic surface began developing visible frost even in the temperature-controlled vault. I contacted Claire to update her. She was in the hospital. Her frostbite had progressed despite no further exposure. Doctors were preparing for partial amputation of 3 fingers. Bury it, she said over the phone. Her voice was weak, drugged. I don't care about isolation anymore. Just bury it somewhere and mark the location so no one ever disturbs it. I prepared a plot in our memorial garden's oldest section, far from other graves. Plot C 91, near the back fence. I dug the hole myself, 4 feet deep, and placed the urn inside. The ground was frozen, despite being mid-March, with temperatures in the 50s. I had to use a pickaxe to break through the top layer of soil. Even 4 feet down, the earth was hard with cold. I filled the hole, tamped down the soil, and planted grass seed over the top. No marker, no indication anything was there. Claire had been specific about that. The grass never grew. That was 8 years ago. I check plot C 91 regularly during my grounds maintenance rounds. The grass around it is green and healthy. The plot itself is bare earth, hard and gray, and cold. I've measured the surface temperature. Even in July, even during heat waves when the ambient temperature reaches 90 degrees, the soil over that plot measures 40 degrees or below. Nothing grows there. No grass, no weeds, no moss. The soil stays frozen year-round despite being in full sun, despite being surrounded by healthy vegetation. We've tried reseeding it 4 times. We've tried laying sod twice. Everything dies within a week of contact with that earth. Last month, I noticed something new. The bare patch has grown, just slightly, maybe 6 inches in diameter, but definitely larger than the original 3-foot circle of the burial plot. The cold is spreading. I've started documenting the expansion with photographs and measurements. Every few weeks, the frozen area extends a little further. Slow, almost imperceptible, but consistent. Claire died 3 years ago. Blood infection from her amputations. I handled her funeral and cremation. Her ashes were scattered at sea, as far from her mother's remains as possible. I think about Dorothy Hutchins sometimes, sealed in her decorative urn 4 feet underground, surrounded by earth that won't thaw. I think about cold that generates itself, that spreads and grows and refuses to dissipate. I think about Claire's blackened fingertips and the frost patterns spreading across her table. Mostly, I think about plot C 91 and how much larger that frozen circle will be by next summer. I've stopped walking across it during my rounds. The cold goes right through my boots. Some couples request to be placed side by side in death, but occasionally they bring their conflicts with them. My name is Director Michael Chen, and I have worked as columbarium manager at Greenwood Memorial Park in Seattle, Washington for 14 years. I oversee our niche wall installations, maintain records of interments, and ensure that cremated remains rest peacefully in their designated spaces. The work is usually quiet, administrative, free from the drama that sometimes accompanies traditional burials. The Bradshaw couple changed that. Edward and Margaret Bradshaw had been married for 46 years when Edward died of a stroke at 71. Margaret followed 6 months later, heart failure that her children said was really just a broken heart. Sweet story. The kind families tell themselves their adult children requested adjacent niches in our main columbarium wall, section 3, positions 14A and 14B, side by side, as the couple had been in life. Standard arrangement. We process dozens of these requests annually. I installed both urns myself on a Tuesday morning in October. Identical bronze containers, matching nameplates placed carefully in their respective niches. Edward on the left, Margaret on the right. I sealed both doors, checked the alignment, and updated our records. The first complaint came from Margaret's daughter, Susan, 3 weeks later. My family is having nightmares, she said. I asked for details, expecting the normal grief-related sleep disturbances that many families experience. We're all having the same dream, Susan said. My sister, my brother, me, even my teenage kids, all of us, the same thing every night. She described the dream, their parents in a dark room, arguing violently. Not the quiet disagreements of a long marriage, but vicious fighting, screaming, throwing objects, the kind of rage that destroys relationships. In the dream, Edward and Margaret stood in complete darkness, just their voices audible, tearing each other apart with words. My parents didn't fight like that, Susan insisted. They had a good marriage, quiet, stable. This doesn't make sense. I suggested grief manifesting strangely, stress responses, the mind processing loss in unexpected ways. She didn't disagree, but she didn't sound satisfied either. Edward's son, Thomas, called 2 days later. My wife and I are having the same dreams Susan described, he said. The violent arguments, the darkness, the sense that our parents hate each other, and we're not the only ones. He explained that he'd contacted extended family members. Margaret's brother was having the dreams. Edward's sister, even a few close family friends. All the same content. All starting around the same time, 3 weeks after Margaret's interment. This is going to sound crazy, Thomas said, but can you check the niches? Make sure everything's okay? I visited Section 3 that afternoon with our maintenance supervisor. We inspected both niches externally. Everything appeared normal. Doors sealed, nameplates secure, no visible damage or disturbance. But something felt wrong. I couldn't articulate it then, just a sense of wrongness radiating from those two adjacent spaces. The supervisor felt it too. He stepped back from the wall without explanation and suggested we document everything with photographs. The photographs showed something we hadn't noticed during visual inspection. Both urns had rotated inside their niches. The nameplates, which should face forward toward the glass viewing panels, were turned sideways. Not dramatically, maybe 45 degrees, but definitely repositioned from their installation alignment. This shouldn't be possible. The niches are designed with just enough space for the urns. There's no room for rotation. The urns fit snugly, secured in place by rubber padding that prevents any movement. I opened both niches the next morning, something we rarely do after installation. Breaking the seal releases the family's trust that their loved ones will remain undisturbed. But the situation warranted investigation. Edward's urn had rotated exactly 90 degrees. The nameplate faced the back wall of the niche, pointing away from Margaret's position. Margaret's urn had rotated the same amount, but in the opposite direction, also facing away from Edward's niche. They were positioned to back, deliberately, impossibly. I photographed everything, documented the positions, and contacted both families. We agreed to an unusual solution: separate the urns to different sections of the columbarium, different walls entirely. I moved Edward first. Section 7, position 43, 3 walls away from Margaret. The urn felt heavier than I remembered, though the weight log showed no change. I installed it carefully, sealed the niche, checked the alignment twice. I moved Margaret the next day. Section 9, position 62, opposite side of the facility from Edward, the farthest separation possible while keeping both in our columbarium. Susan called 3 days later. "The dreams stopped," she said. She sounded relieved but uncertain. "All of us, no more nightmares. Whatever you did, it worked." I explained the separation. She thanked me and hung up. That relief lasted exactly 9 days. I was conducting routine maintenance rounds when I noticed something wrong with Section 3. Positions 14A and 14B, the original Bradshaw locations, were occupied. Both niches contained urns, bronze containers with nameplates reading Edward Bradshaw and Margaret Bradshaw. I checked my records. I checked the installation logs. I personally verified sections 7 and 9. Edward's urn was in position 43 of section 7. Margaret's was in position 62 of section 9. I could see them both, right where I'd placed them. But they were also in section 3, positions 14A and 14B, both places simultaneously. I stood in that columbarium for 20 minutes, walking between sections, confirming what couldn't be true. 4 urns, 2 couples, same names, same dates, same everything. I called our security company and requested all surveillance footage from the past week. They sent it that evening. The footage showed nothing. No one had entered the columbarium after hours. No one had accessed the niche walls. The cameras captured empty corridors, locked doors, undisturbed silence. But frame by frame, I could watch Section 3, positions 14A and 14B. Empty niches at 8 p.m. Occupied niches at 8:15 p.m. No transition, no movement, just suddenly occupied, the urns appearing between one frame and the next. I contacted both families, asked careful questions without revealing the full situation. When did the nightmares resume? 9 days after the separation. The same night the urns reappeared in Section 3. I've stopped trying to separate them. The families have stopped asking. The nightmares continue, all of them. The extended family, the friends, anyone who was close to Edward and Margaret Bradshaw. Every night, the same dream. The dark room, the violent arguments, the hatred that maybe was always there, hidden beneath 46 years of routine and silence. The urns remain in 4 locations. Section 3, positions 14A and 14B. Section 7, position 43. Section 9, position 62. I've verified this daily for 8 months. All 4 positions are simultaneously occupied. All 4 urns are real, solid, verifiable. And in Section 3, if I visit late in the evening when the facility is empty, I can sometimes hear sounds coming from behind those sealed niche doors. Voices muffled by bronze and brick, but audible if you stand close enough. A man and a woman arguing in the darkness. They're back to back again. The urns have rotated away from each other, but they're together, and I think they always will be. Money changes people, but I've never seen it kill them until the Carlisle estate. My name is Director Patricia Sullivan, and I have worked as a funeral director at Lakeside Memorial Services in Minneapolis, Minnesota for 26 years. I've witnessed families torn apart by grief, united by loss, and occasionally destroyed by greed. The Carlisle siblings fell into that last category, though none of us knew it at the time. Diane Carlisle died at 78, leaving behind an estate valued at approximately $3 million and 3 adult children who hadn't spoken civilly to each other in over a decade. The will was contentious. Legal disputes had delayed the funeral for weeks while lawyers argued over asset distribution. When the siblings finally came to arrange their mother's service, the tension was immediate and obvious. Robert, the oldest at 53, arrived first. Expensive suit, corporate bearing, the kind of controlled anger that successful businessmen cultivate. His sister Jennifer came next, 49, dressed casually but expensively, phone constantly in hand. The youngest, Marcus, showed up 20 minutes late, wearing jeans and hostility. They couldn't agree on anything. Casket style, flower arrangements, music selection, every decision became a battleground. Finally, Jennifer suggested something that actually unified them. "Let's just cremate her," she said. "Divide the ashes 3 ways. We each take our portion and handle it however we want. No more arguments." Robert and Marcus agreed immediately, probably the only thing they'd agreed on in years. I explained the process, the timeline, the paperwork. They signed everything without reading it, barely looking at each other. When I asked about the urn selection, they chose the cheapest option. "We're not keeping them together," Robert said flatly. "Just divide everything equally, and we'll take our shares." I processed Diane's cremation personally, then measured out the ashes with precision. 2 pounds, 4 ounces per portion, exactly equal. I placed each third in a simple plastic temporary container, labeled them with the siblings' names, and called them for pickup. They collected their portions on separate days. None of them asked about a service. None of them seemed interested in memorializing their mother beyond taking their share of her physical remains. I thought that was the end of my involvement. Marcus died first. 8 weeks after collecting his portion. Car accident on I-94. He crossed the center line at highway speed, hit an oncoming semi head-on. The police report noted no brake marks, no signs of evasive action, no evidence of impairment, just a straight drive into certain death. His siblings didn't attend the funeral. I know because I handled it. His girlfriend made the arrangements. She was young, devastated, and bewildered by the sudden absence of Marcus's family. "His brother and sister won't even return my calls," she told me. They sent flowers but didn't come to the service. What kind of people do that? I had no answer. Jennifer died 5 months later. Stroke at 49, no warning signs, no family history. She collapsed in her office and was dead before the paramedics arrived. Her assistant found her slumped over her desk, one hand still holding her phone. Robert handled her arrangements this time. He walked into my office looking gaunt, aged a decade since I'd last seen him. We planned a simple service, no family viewing. He wanted it done quickly. I don't understand what's happening, he said quietly. First Marcus, now Jennifer. We were healthy, all of us. He paused, staring at his hands. I've been having dreams every night since Marcus died. Dreams about my mother, standing in darkness, pointing at something I can't see. And in the dreams, Marcus and Jennifer are with her now, standing behind her, all of them just watching me. I offered sympathetic words about grief and stress. He shook his head. You don't understand. They're not sad in the dreams. They're waiting, like they know something I don't. Robert died 6 weeks later. Heart failure at 53. His housekeeper found him in his study, sitting in his desk chair, both hands clutching his chest. The autopsy showed massive cardiac arrest, despite no prior heart condition, no blocked arteries, no medical explanation. His wife handled the arrangements. I barely recognized her. The confident woman I'd met briefly at Jennifer's funeral was gone, replaced by someone hollow and frightened. I need to tell you something, she said, before you finalize anything. Something about the ashes. She explained that Robert had kept his portion of Diane's ashes in his study in the temporary container I'd given him. He'd never transferred them to a proper urn, never scattered them, never made any permanent arrangement. 3 days before he died, I went into his study and found the container open, she said. The lid was off, sitting beside it on the desk. I asked Robert about it, and he said he didn't open it, that it must have come loose somehow. She wrapped her arms around herself. The next morning, it was open again, lid completely off, sitting next to the container. I sealed it myself this time, used tape to secure it. The following day, open again. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The night before Robert died, I woke up and heard him talking to someone in his study. I went downstairs and found him sitting at his desk, the ash container open in front of him, having a conversation with empty air. He was saying, I'm sorry, over and over. She reached into her purse and pulled out 2 sealed plastic bags. I recognized them immediately, the temporary containers for Marcus's and Jennifer's portions. Their surviving spouses brought these to me after the funerals, she said. Neither wanted to keep them. They were too scared. They'd both had the same experiences, containers opening on their own, dreams about the dead, that sense of being watched. She placed them on my desk. I brought Robert's portion too, all 3 siblings, all 3 portions of their mother's ashes. I need you to take them, scatter them together somewhere, mix them back into one. I don't care where or how, just make them whole again. I scattered all 3 portions in our memorial garden that afternoon, mixed them together, every fragment, until Diane Carlisle was unified once more. I dug a hole near our oldest oak tree and buried the combined ashes deep. That was 18 months ago. The spouses are all still alive. The dreams stopped, they've told me. The containers stopped opening. The sense of being watched dissipated, but sometimes, early morning when I'm checking the memorial garden, I pause at that oak tree and think about three siblings who divided their mother and paid for it with their lives. I think about greed and division and things that shouldn't be split apart, and I wonder how many other families have made the same mistake, scattered across different funeral homes, different cities, different graves. I don't offer to divide ashes anymore. Some things are meant to stay whole. Some families need to witness the cremation to know with certainty what happened to their loved ones. I understand that need, even when it leads to questions I can't answer. My name is Victor Grant, and I have worked as a crematory operator at Hillside Cremation Services in Denver, Colorado for 21 years. I operate the retort, process remains with documented precision, and maintain the chain of custody that ensures families receive exactly what they're supposed to. It's technical work, methodical, with no room for error or doubt. Until Gerald Simmons demanded to watch his wife's cremation. It's an unusual request, but not unheard of. Some cultures encourage witness cremations. Some families need that closure, that certainty. We have protocols, observation windows, controlled environments, supervised viewing. I've facilitated perhaps a dozen witness cremations in 2 decades. Gerald's was different from the beginning. His wife Amanda had died at 62. Cancer, long illness, difficult end. Gerald had been her sole caretaker for 18 months, watching her deteriorate slowly, helplessly. By the time she died, he looked almost as skeletal as she did. He called me directly before making arrangements. I need to watch, he said. I need to know it's really her, that it's really happening. I need to see it. I explained the process gently, what he would witness, how long it would take, the emotional difficulty of watching a loved one's body consumed by fire. He insisted, said he'd spent 18 months watching her die slowly. He could handle watching the final step. We scheduled the cremation for a Tuesday morning. Gerald arrived early, documentation in hand, moving with the careful deliberation of someone operating on determination rather than strength. I showed him to the observation area, a small room with a reinforced window overlooking the retort. I explained what would happen, gave him the option to leave at any point, and prepared Amanda's body for cremation. The process is straightforward. Body placement, retort ignition, temperature monitoring, processing time. I've done this thousands of times. The procedure never changes. Gerald watched everything, didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't speak, just stood at that window for the full 3 hours, witnessing what fire does to human remains. When the cremation was complete and the ashes properly processed, I invited him to observe the final steps. He watched me remove the remains from the retort, process them through our reduction equipment, and transfer the ashes to the temporary container he'd selected. I need to witness you seal it, he said. I sealed the container in front of him, placed it in our secure storage, and gave him the claim ticket. Standard procedure. Everything documented, everything observed. He collected the ashes 2 days later, held the container for a long moment, feeling its weight, studying it carefully. Then he thanked me and left. I thought that was the end. Gerald returned 6 weeks later. He looked worse, more weight lost, dark circles under his eyes, that peculiar vacancy that comes from not sleeping properly. He placed the sealed container on my desk, the same container I'd given him 6 weeks prior. "These aren't her ashes," he said. I asked him to explain. "I don't know what these are, but they're not Amanda. They've been replaced." I assured him that was impossible. The container had been sealed in his presence. Chain of custody was unbroken. These were definitively his wife's cremated remains. "The weight is wrong," he insisted. "I held that container when you gave it to me. I know exactly how it felt. This weighs the same, but it's wrong somehow. The balance is different." I tried to explain that cremated remains settle, that perception of weight can change based on grip and stress and a dozen other factors. He wouldn't accept it. "Open it," he said. "Please, just open it and show me what's inside." I explained that breaking the seal would compromise the remains, that I couldn't just casually open cremation containers. He signed a waiver absolving us of responsibility. He needed to see, he said, needed to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind. I broke the seal carefully, opened the container, and showed him the contents. Gray-white ash, bone fragments, the characteristic appearance of processed cremated remains. Exactly what should be there. Exactly what I'd placed in that container 6 weeks prior. Gerald stared at the ashes for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." He asked me to reseal the container. I transferred the ashes to a new one, sealed it properly, and returned it to him. He left without meeting my eyes. He died 3 months later. I learned about it when his daughter called to arrange his funeral. She was matter of fact about it, clinical in the way people get when they've been expecting bad news. "Heart attack," she said. "Quick at least. He was only 64. She wanted cremation, same facility where we'd processed her mother. I handled it personally, out of respect for Gerald's earlier experience with us. The autopsy results came through before the cremation. Standard procedure for unexpected deaths. I don't normally see these reports, but the medical examiner flagged something unusual and contacted our facility directly. Gerald's lungs contained foreign material, specifically human cremated remains, not scattered throughout, concentrated in specific areas of lung tissue, embedded deep enough to suggest chronic inhalation over an extended period. The medical examiner wanted to know if Gerald had worked in a crematory, if he'd had any occupational exposure to cremated remains. I explained his only contact with our facility was his wife's cremation 6 weeks before his health declined. "That doesn't explain the volume we found," the examiner said. "We're talking about significant amounts of cremated bone and ash embedded in his lung tissue. This represents prolonged, repeated exposure." I had no explanation to offer. Gerald's daughter scattered both her parents' ashes together at a mountain overlook they'd loved. I wasn't present for the ceremony. but she called me afterward with a question I still can't answer. Dad had started sleeping with Mom's urn, she said, after he brought it home from your facility that second time, after you resealed it. I found entries in his journal about waking up with ash on his pillow, ash in his mouth, ash coating his face. He thought he was having nightmares about breathing her in. She paused, but it wasn't a nightmare, was it? The autopsy proved that. He really was breathing her in somehow. The urn was sealed. I saw the seal myself, intact until I opened it for the scattering. So, how did her ashes get into his lungs? I told her I didn't know, because I don't. I've stopped allowing witness cremations. When families request them now, I explain we've discontinued the practice due to emotional concerns. Most accept this without argument. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm running the retort for the next day's cremations, I think about Gerald Simmons watching his wife burn. I think about him taking those ashes home, sleeping beside them, breathing something in that shouldn't have been able to escape a sealed container. I think about the medical examiner's question: how did significant amounts of cremated remains end up deep in living lung tissue? And I think about Gerald's insistence that the ashes had been replaced, that they were wrong somehow, that something had changed. Maybe he was right. Maybe what came home with him wasn't Amanda at all. Maybe it was something else entirely, wearing her ashes like a disguise. I don't witness cremations anymore. Some things shouldn't be watched too closely. Privacy in grief is normal, but some isolation goes beyond normal into something else entirely. My name is Director Alan Hayes, and I have worked as a funeral director at Brookside Memorial Chapel in Richmond, Virginia for 18 years. I help families navigate loss, arrange services, and facilitate the practical necessities that death demands. Most families grieve openly or quietly but visibly. Occasionally, someone grieves in ways that raise questions I'm not qualified to answer. Martin Webb was one of those cases. His wife Ellen died at 71. Stroke. Fast and final, Martin handled the arrangements himself, his adult children noticeably absent from the process. He was methodical, unemotional, making decisions with the detachment of someone planning a business transaction rather than burying his wife of 43 years. He chose cremation, selected a simple brass urn, declined any service or gathering. When I asked about his children, he said they lived out of state and wouldn't be attending. No further explanation. I processed Ellen's cremation and called Martin for pickup. He arrived exactly on time, signed the paperwork, took the urn, and left without ceremony. That should have been the end of our interaction. Martin's son called me 6 weeks later. His name was David, and he sounded both angry and frightened. My father won't let anyone into the house, he said. He's locked himself in there with my mother's ashes and refuses to answer the door or phone. We're worried about him. I asked if they'd contacted authorities for a wellness check. David said they had, twice. Both times, Martin answered the door, showed the police he was fine, and refused assistance. Legally, there was nothing they could do. But something's wrong, David insisted. The neighbors say he never leaves the house. His car hasn't moved in 3 weeks. They see lights on in one room at night, always the same room, but never anywhere else in the house. He paused. The back bedroom. That's where he's keeping her urn. The room next to it shares a wall with the neighbor's house. She says she hears him talking in there, hours every night, having conversations with someone who never responds. I offered to attempt a visit, though I wasn't sure what I could accomplish that family and police hadn't. David gave me the address and asked me to try. I arrived at Martin's house on a Thursday afternoon, a modest ranch in a quiet neighborhood, well-maintained yard, nothing outwardly concerning. I knocked on the front door. Martin answered after several minutes. He looked gaunt, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd worn to collect Ellen's ashes 6 weeks prior. He recognized me immediately. "I don't need anything," he said. I explained that I'd come to check on him, that his family was concerned. He stared at me for a long moment. "Tell them I'm fine. Tell them to leave me alone." He started to close the door. I asked him gently if he'd like to talk, if there was anything I could help with regarding Ellen's final arrangements. "She's exactly where she needs to be," he said. Then he shut the door. I reported back to David, told him his father appeared physically healthy if emotionally isolated, suggested grief counseling, time, patience. David thanked me and hung up, sounding unsatisfied. I didn't hear anything more about Martin Webb for 2 months. Then David called again, this time barely coherent. "He's dead. My father's dead. The police found him this morning." The neighbor had finally called authorities after 3 days of complete silence from the house. No lights, no sounds, no movement. When police forced entry, they found Martin in the back bedroom, sitting in a chair facing the urn on the dresser, dead for approximately 72 hours, the coroner estimated. Cause of death appeared to be natural, heart failure probably. But David told me something the police report wouldn't include. "The door was locked from the inside," he said. "The back bedroom, locked with the key still in the lock, turned to the locked position. The windows were sealed shut. Dad had nailed them closed from the inside. No way in or out except through that locked door." I started to ask about significance when David continued. "The neighbors reported seeing lights in that window 2 nights ago, 72 hours after the coroner says Dad died. The lights were on for 3 hours, then went dark. But Dad was already dead by then." His voice cracked. "We went to collect Mom's urn today, my sister and I. We opened the bedroom door, had to break the lock, and went inside." Long pause. I could hear him breathing heavily. "The urn was empty, completely empty, sealed, sitting exactly where it should be on the dresser, but when we opened it, nothing inside, no ashes, no residue, nothing, like it had never held anything at all." I had no explanation. Suggested perhaps Martin had scattered the ashes privately. David shut that down immediately. We checked the entire room, every surface, every corner, the closet, under the furniture. No ash residue anywhere, and the urn was sealed. We had to break the seal to open it. If Dad had opened it to scatter the ashes, we'd have seen evidence of tampering. There was none. He was quiet for a moment. "There's something else. Dad's position in the chair. The coroner said he'd been dead for 3 days, but his body was sitting upright, hands folded in his lap, eyes open. Rigor mortis should have set in and released. He should have slumped, shifted, something, but he was sitting perfectly straight, like he'd been positioned that way and held there. I attended Martin's funeral at David's request. Small service, family only. They buried him in our memorial garden, traditional burial rather than cremation. David told me they couldn't stomach the thought of cremation after what happened with Ellen's ashes. During the service, David pulled me aside. We found Dad's journal in the bedroom. He'd been writing in it every day since Mom died. Want to know what the last entry said? I nodded, dated the day before he died. Just one sentence. She's here now. We can leave together. David looked at me with hollow eyes. What do you think that means? Leave for where? I had no answer, but sometimes I think about Martin Webb, locked in that bedroom with an empty urn and lights that burned for hours after he died. I think about Ellen's ashes, vanished from a sealed container without trace or explanation. I think about his final words. She's here now, and wonder if he was right. Maybe she was there. Maybe she came back. And maybe Martin Webb finally got what he wanted. I don't ask families about their plans for cremains anymore. Some destinations aren't meant for the living to know. Water is supposed to carry things away, disperse them, dissolve them into nothing. Sometimes it brings them back instead. My name is Director Sarah Lee, and I have worked as Assistant Funeral Director at Riverside Memorial Services in Portland, Oregon for 13 years. I coordinate services, help families navigate arrangements, and occasionally facilitate scatterings in meaningful locations. Rivers are popular choices, symbolic of journey, of return to nature, of peaceful dissolution. The Thornton family chose the Willamette River. Patricia Thornton had died at 67. Cancer, long illness, difficult end. Her final wishes were specific. Cremation, then scattering in the Willamette near the Morrison Bridge, a spot she'd loved during her years working downtown. Her family gathered on a Saturday morning in late September. 5 people, her husband James, 2 adult daughters, a brother, a sister-in-law. I attended as witness and facilitator, standard practice for our service-assisted scatterings. The weather was mild, the river calm. James held the urn, a simple ceramic piece with Patricia's name etched on the side. We walked to the designated spot on the riverbank, a small park area with public access to the water. I offered a few words about the scattering process, the symbolism of water and release. The family added their own words, memories of Patricia, expressions of love and loss. Then James opened the urn and began to pour. The ashes caught the slight breeze, drifting out across the water in gray clouds before settling on the surface. Some dispersed immediately, others floated for a moment before sinking. Within minutes, the urn was empty, and Patricia Thornton had become part of the river. The family stood there for several more minutes, watching the water flow past. Then they thanked me and left. I thought it was a peaceful ending to a difficult journey. The calls started 3 weeks later. Not to me directly, to our main office. Homeowners downstream from the scattering site reporting strange ash deposits on their riverbank properties. Gray white residue coating rocks and sand, appearing overnight, impossible to wash away completely. Our office director contacted me, asked if I'd supervised the Thornton scattering, if anything unusual had occurred. I confirmed everything had been standard, professional, properly executed. The thing is, she said, these reports are coming from properties 3, 4, even 5 miles downstream. Cremated remains don't travel that far in concentrated form. They should disperse immediately. I agreed, but had no explanation. The calls continued for weeks. More homeowners, more reports of ash coating their riverbank properties. The local water authority got involved, started testing. They found unusually high concentrations of cremated human remains in the river water, specifically in the stretch from Morrison Bridge downstream to Selwood. This doesn't make sense, the water quality manager told our office. Cremated remains sink and disperse rapidly in moving water. We shouldn't be detecting significant concentrations weeks later, and certainly not over a 5-mile stretch. It's like the source is continuous, not a single scattering event. But there was no continuous source, just Patricia Thornton's ashes, scattered once 3 weeks prior. Then the accident started. A kayaker drowned near Selwood Bridge. Experienced paddler, calm water, no explanation. His body was found floating face down in shallow water near the bank. A week later, a fisherman fell from the rocks near OMS Wong and drowned. Again, experienced, familiar with the location, no obvious cause. A swimmer disappeared near the Morrison Bridge. Her body was recovered 2 days later, 3 miles downstream. All water related, all unexplained, all within the stretch of river affected by the ash deposits. I started tracking the reports obsessively, though I didn't know why. Something felt wrong about the pattern, about the persistence of Patricia's remains in the river, about the deaths clustering in that specific area. The Water Authority increased their testing. They brought in specialists from the State Environmental Agency. Everyone agreed the concentration of cremated remains was impossible given a single scattering event, but no one could identify an alternative source. I contacted James Thornton, Patricia's widower, asked careful questions about the scattering, about Patricia herself, about anything that might explain the unusual situation. She loved that river, he said quietly, walked along it every day when she worked downtown. She told me once that if she could choose how to spend eternity, it would be in that water, watching the city she loved. He paused. Is something wrong? Did we do something incorrectly? I assured him everything was fine, just following up on some administrative details. I didn't mention the ash deposits or the deaths. What would be the point? The deaths continued. 6 total over 4 months, all in the same stretch of river, all water related, all unexplained. The Water Authority finally issued a notice. Swimming and water contact discouraged in the affected area until further notice. They still couldn't explain the persistent ash concentrations or why standard dispersal patterns weren't occurring. I drove to the Morrison Bridge one evening after work, stood at the spot where we'd scattered Patricia's ashes 4 months earlier. The water looked normal, moving at its usual pace, reflecting the sunset in ordinary ways. But when I knelt at the bank and ran my hand through the shallow water, I felt it. Fine sediment coating the rocks, impossibly smooth and light. I pulled my hand back and examined my fingers. Gray ash, unmistakable. 4 months after the scattering, Patricia's ashes still coated the riverbank where we'd released them. I walked downstream. Every 100 yards, I checked the water, the rocks, the sand. The ash was everywhere, a persistent layer that shouldn't exist, that should have dispersed completely within days of the original scattering. But it hadn't dispersed, it had spread. I reached Selwood Bridge as darkness fell. The riverbank was thick with the gray residue. In the fading light, it almost looked intentional, like someone had deliberately coated every surface with cremated remains. The Water Authority released their final report 6 weeks later. They determined the ash concentrations would eventually decrease naturally, that intervention was unnecessary, that the anomaly represented a statistical outlier they couldn't fully explain. Swimming restrictions were lifted, the deaths stopped, the ash deposits slowly diminished over the following months. But I've walked that stretch of river a dozen times since, and I can still find traces. Gray powder in the crevices of rocks, fine sediment in the sand, the faint, persistent presence of Patricia Thornton's remains refusing to be carried away. James called me last month, said he'd been walking the river path, the route Patricia used to take every day, said he'd started seeing her sometimes at dusk, standing at the water's edge near Morrison Bridge, looking out at the city she loved. Just for a moment, he said, then she's gone, but I know it's her. I didn't ask him to clarify, didn't suggest grief hallucinations or tricks of light, because I've seen her too, standing at the riverbank where we scattered her ashes, exactly where she asked to spend eternity. Still there, still watching, still refusing to leave. I don't facilitate river scatterings anymore. Security cameras capture everything in our facility, but occasionally they record things that shouldn't be possible. My name is Marcus Webb, and I have worked as night security at Evergreen Memorial Columbarium in Sacramento, California for 9 years. I monitor surveillance feeds, conduct building checks, and ensure that the deceased and their resting places remain undisturbed during overnight hours. It's quiet work, peaceful. The dead don't cause problems, and visitors are rare after closing. Until I noticed the Tuesday woman. She first appeared on camera 3 months into my employment. Tuesday, 2:07 a.m., entering through the main corridor towards Section C of our columbarium wall. Elderly woman, perhaps 75, wearing a long dark coat and moving slowly but purposefully. I checked the access logs. No one had entered the building. All doors showed secure, all alarms inactive. But the camera clearly showed her walking down the corridor, stopping at niche C-43 and standing there for approximately 8 minutes before leaving the same way she'd entered. I reported it the next morning. Director Mills reviewed the footage and agreed it was unusual, but suggested a camera glitch or timestamp error. The woman must have visited during operational hours, and the recording got misfiled. Except she appeared again the following Tuesday. Same time, 2:07 a.m., same route, same niche. 8 minutes of standing before that particular space in the columbarium wall, then departure. I started watching for her specifically. Every Tuesday, precisely 2:07 a.m., the elderly woman entered our facility on camera and visited niche C-43. I walked the building during these times, checking corridors and sections. I never saw her physically, just on the surveillance feeds. Director Mills suggested we review the niche contents. Maybe there was a family issue, someone concerned about their loved one's remains. Niche C-43 held unclaimed ashes from 1992. A woman named Dorothy Fletcher, who died at 73 with no family or next of kin. The state had paid for basic cremation, and we'd stored her ashes for the required 7-year period. When no one claimed her, we interred the urn in our columbarium per standard protocol for unclaimed remains. 23 years she'd been there. No visitors, no flowers, no indication anyone remembered Dorothy Fletcher existed. This has to be a relative, Mills said, someone who finally tracked her down. But that didn't explain the 2 a.m. visits or why the woman never appeared on any camera except the corridor feeds. Our entrance cameras never captured her arriving or leaving. Our external security showed no movement around the building during these times. She was only visible in the internal corridor, walking to and from that one niche. I started documenting every appearance. 15 weeks of Tuesday visits, always 2:07 a.m., always exactly 8 minutes at niche C-43. The timestamp never varied by more than a few seconds. Then I noticed something in the footage I'd missed before. The woman was wearing the same clothes in every recording. Identical dark coat, identical shoes, identical posture and movement. Not similar, exactly the same. Like watching the same recording played repeatedly, except the date and timestamp changed each week. I compared multiple recordings side by side. Frame by frame, the woman's movements matched perfectly. Every step, every pause, every slight adjustment of her coat. Identical across 15 separate Tuesday visits. This wasn't a person. This was something else. I showed Mills the comparison. He studied the footage for a long time without speaking. "We need to check Dorothy Fletcher's information," he said finally. We pulled her file. Basic documentation, death certificate, cremation authorization, internment record. No photograph, no personal history beyond the bare minimum required for processing. "Look at the death date," Mills said. Dorothy Fletcher had died on a Tuesday, the same day of the week as our mysterious visitor's appearances. "And the birth date," he continued. I checked. Dorothy Fletcher was born in 1919. If she were still alive, she'd be in her mid-90s. The woman on our camera appeared to be mid-70s. Exactly the age Dorothy Fletcher was when she died in 1992. Mills made the decision that afternoon. We would scatter Dorothy Fletcher's ashes in our memorial garden and remove her from the columbarium. Maybe that would end whatever was happening. We performed the scattering the following Monday, removed the urn from niche C-43, carried it to our garden's remembrance section, and released the ashes beneath an old oak tree. No ceremony, no witnesses, just Mills and myself performing the minimum required ritual. I worked my regular shift that Tuesday night, watched the surveillance feeds carefully as 2 a.m. approached. 2:07 a.m. came and went. No visitor, no elderly woman in a dark coat. The corridor remained empty. I thought we'd solved it. Then I reviewed the memorial garden cameras for that night, something I rarely did since the garden was closed after dark and rarely had activity. At 2:07 a.m., the garden camera showed movement near the oak tree where we'd scattered Dorothy's ashes. An elderly woman in a dark coat standing in the exact spot where the ashes had settled into the soil. I watched her stand there for 8 minutes. Then, just before she turned to leave, she did something she'd never done in any of the corridor recordings. She looked directly at the camera, and her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear but could clearly read. "Thank you." The footage ended. I showed Mills the next morning. We sat in his office and watched that final moment together. Dorothy Fletcher looking at the camera, acknowledging us, thanking us. "Pull up her records one more time," Mills said quietly. I did, read through the file again, looking for something we'd missed. There it was. In the notes section, barely legible handwriting from whoever had processed her internment in 1992. Daughter confirmed deceased was estranged from family for 30 years. Last known contact. Daughter visited weekly on Tuesdays until approximately 2008. We checked hospital and nursing home records. Found Dorothy Fletcher's admission information from 1992. She'd been placed in county facility care 3 weeks before her death. Weekly visits documented from a woman who signed in as daughter but never provided a full name. The visits ended in 2008. The same year our Tuesday camera appearances began, Mills closed the file. Dorothy wasn't the visitor, he said. She was being visited. I understood then. The daughter had Dorothy deceased sometime in 2008, and she continued her Tuesday visits to the mother she'd never abandoned, even though Dorothy was already dead, even though the daughter herself had passed. Every Tuesday at 2:07 a.m. for years. Faithful, persistent, loving, until we scattered Dorothy's ashes and she could finally rest. Until we gave her the acknowledgement she'd been waiting for. Until we let her go. I still check the memorial garden cameras every Tuesday, just in case. The oak tree where we scattered Dorothy Fletcher's ashes has grown remarkably well, healthier than the surrounding trees, greener, stronger, and sometimes, in the early morning footage, I see a shadow near its base, just for a moment. Then it's gone. I don't question it anymore. Some visits are meant to continue. Some love doesn't end with death.